by. So if there are any of you out there that would like to appear, please call me at 593-1306. We are also looking for sponsors to help us produce the show. Okay? I believe that everyone has a story if you just listen. One of the residents here at the Towers is Frances Starett. I would like to tell a story about her grandfather, Cyrus E. Cy Brown for short, from North Valley. Cy was one of the hundreds of Oswego County farm boys who answered President Lincoln's call to arms during the first part of the Civil War. He was 22 years old when he enlisted for 3 years at Fulton, New York. When he wasn't in the hospital, he spent most of those 3 years in combat with Company D of the 147th New York Volunteers. His enlistment started on August 21st, 1862. On July 1st, 1863, his outfit was on McPherson's Ridge at Gettysburg, where the first cannon shot of the battle was fired by Buford's battery at 8 o'clock in the morning. Before nightfall, Cy had a bullet hole in each leg, put there by a rebel sniper from a nearby tree. He was evacuated to Summit House, USA General Hospital at Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Cy healed fast. On September 17, 1863, he was returned to duty with Company D. However, he never made roll call after he got back because infection set in, and by November he was back in the hospital again. The company had been moving south. The nearest hospital was at Chester, Pennsylvania. By the year 1864, he was back with Company D. On April 18th, he was promoted to corporal. A short time later, he was shot again by a sniper while the company was laying timbers at Pollock's Bridge. This time, the bullet nicked his left arm. Others of the company had been killed here from sniper fire. The wound healed with no loss of time from the company. On the night of May 3rd, 1864, the 147th New York crossed the Rapidan River into the wilderness in Virginia. The area was west of Fredericksburg. It was so named because of the thick growth of dwarf pine, scrub oak, chinquapins, and brambles. Formerly, all the trees had been cut to furnish firewood for the nearby iron furnaces. The second growth that sprung up made it truly the wilderness. Oftentimes, the soldiers on both sides would come up on each other without warning, not knowing which way to turn to find their way out. To flush out the combatants in the area, grape shot was used. The grape shot was a small, solid metal, semi-round object shaped like an oversized grape. 9 of these were contained in a projectile, which when exploded sent them all 9 in different directions with the force of a rifle bullet. On May 6, 1864, in the wilderness, one of these grape shots tore through Corporal Cyrus Brown's left shoulder, destroying the clavicle and lodging in the tissue of his back. The force of the impact rendered him unconscious. He was left on the battlefield for dead. No one knows how long he was comatose. The smell of decaying flesh attracted bluebottle flies who laid eggs in the oozing wound. The eggs hatched into maggots that feasted on the gangrenous flesh. They probably saved his life. 8 days after he had been wounded, Brown was found by a stretcher bearer. The corporal was very much alive. They took him to an emergency hospital where G.R. Clark, the division surgeon from Oswego, removed the 13-ounce grape shot. He said the wound had been kept clean by the maggots. On May 26, he was moved to Harewood General Hospital at Washington, D.C. The Civil War was over when he was discharged on June 23, 1865. He returned to his farm in North Valley, where he lived for many years afterwards, dying at age 91 on September 14, 1932. He was one tough hombre. How long did that take? 3 minutes? I got others. You want to cut that? You know, you don't want to. I have others here. Oh my goodness, I got some good ones.
Oh, come on, look at this.
The towpath towers was named because it overlooks the towpath of the old Oswego Canal. And back in the 1800s, when the old Oswego Canal was running, and you had to move your canal boat out early, you would find most of the people in other boats asleep. The lock tenders were asleep also, so you tended the locks yourself. This would entail driving your boat into the open lock, tying it to a snubbing post, and pushing the lock gate shut by leaning against the heavy balance beams on each side. Then you would go to the other gates and pull down on the handle that opened a paddle valve. This would let the lock fill up. You would repeat the same operation in reverse on the outer gates. The mules were hooked up again, and with a signal to the driver, you were off to the next lock. When you approached the lock, you blew your horn, which was a long, narrow bored metal tube flared on one end, and you hollered, "Ho the lock," or "Rah, lock tender." There was only room for one boat in the lock at a time. When you had a cargo that was due in so many days, you wanted to get through the locks as fast as possible so that you could pick up a return cargo after you unloaded. Sometimes brawls started around the locks because someone wanted to be the first one through. If you got out early, you could make good time. For almost 80 years, boats, people, and goods went up and down the 38-mile length of the Oswego Canal that started in Syracuse and ended in Oswego. Canalers, the people that lived and worked on the canal, were born, lived, married, had children, and died on the canal. The waters of the canal claimed many of them. Old and young people drowned in its waters. Horses and mules drowned. There were times that the water was so high that you couldn't get your boat under the bridges. There were times that the water was so low that you were tied up for days. It was a way of life for all these years. There were stops along the way that were refreshing to the canalers. In Liverpool, they would stop at the salt blocks, where the salt was produced by boiling off the water, and drop raw potatoes in the hot brine. The resulting salt potatoes were a mouth-watering delicacy topped with a dab of butter. In Fulton, there was a water stop where the present library is now. Beautiful, clear, cold spring cascaded down the ledge rock that jutted from the hill. The same spring still runs in the cellar under the library. The water containers of the boat were filled and we were on our way. The canal snaked its way along the river through the village of Fulton, under the bridge at Oneida and East First Streets, where it made an oblique turn to the northeast. That's back of the present Valley News building. It headed due north from here, where present Route 481 is now. As the mules pulled us past the Sixth Ward Hotel, now the Seneca Motel, several ladies of the evening beckoned to us from an upstairs window. We passed them by. Several miles north, we tied up at the Van Buren Inn for libations. This being done, we went on our way to Oswego. Unless the study of the old Oswego Canal history is made, it is difficult for people today to understand the difference between the old canal and the present barge canal. It helps to briefly understand that the river was first, the old Oswego Canal was second, and the barge canal was third chronologically. While a lot of the old canal has been filled in, much of it still remains, including many of the locks in good condition with the exception of the wooden gates. Several of the description of the life on the canal was taken from interviews with canalers, and they've all passed away since then. How much more time we got? Plenty. My voice is wearing out. We're just gonna keep running here? Okay. Oh, yeah. Fulton is known for a lot of things, and a lot of things are worth money now today that were made in Fulton. One of these was a Hart Pottery. Underneath the Starett complex on the South First Street lies a wealth of buried history. Part of this history was the Hart Pottery, which formerly stood at what used to be number 364 South First. Stoneware pottery was made here from 1832 until 1892, when the property was destroyed by fire. For 60 years, the Harts made thousands of various types of stoneware. Today, they are priceless collector's items. They made ceramic water filters, cuspidors, crocks, vases, bean pots, flower pots, teapots, jugs, churns, and many other utilitarian vessels. The year that the Hart brothers, James and Samuel, started the pottery was 4 years after the Oswego Canal had been opened. It was handily in their backyard where their special clay could be delivered from Amboy, New Jersey, and their finished products sent out to many markets. The area was still called Oswego Falls. The falls were in their backyard also. The brothers recently arrived from England, brought the stoneware manufacturing process along with them. Stoneware pottery, a German interpretation of coarse pottery making, was heavy like stone, hence the name. James and Samuel also brought the process of salt glazing with them. This glaze was a transparent, vitreous, glass-like hard coating which attached itself to the stoneware permanently. The glaze was formed when salt was added to the burning kiln and allowed to cool until a vapor was formed. The salt vapor settled around the surface of the clay vessels inside the kiln and became chemically bonded to the silica in the body. The glaze that was formed became a transparent coating that did not affect the color of the products being fired. The Harts produced a stop grade of stoneware. Their original designs, which they decorated their stoneware with, were quite light and sensitive. These sketches and the bulbous shape of their vessels make identification of pottery from this fairly easy. Although the times and the owners of the works changed, the quaint designs of the Hart family remained a constant. Today it represents some of the world's finest examples of folk art. The table for collectors below shows the changes of management and municipalities through which the pottery went at the same location. It is known now as the Hart Pottery at Fulton for identifying Hart Pottery. At the time of the fire in 1892, the pottery had branched off into the manufacturing of sewer pipe, fire brick, fire clay, and a product called Stewart's Ready Roofing. Offshoots of the Fulton works sprung up several times during the 60 years it was in business. In 1849, Sam and William Hart started potteries in Picton, Ontario, Canada. Their marking was Hart Brothers, Picton, Ontario. Another offshoot was established by James Hart in the Shenango County village of Sherburne, New York. Still yet another was started by Charles in Ogdensburg, New York in 1850. It was short-lived, being destroyed by fire. A street called Pottery Lane is the only memory left. Sam Hart, one of the original founders of the Hart Pottery in Fulton, acquired a new house in 1860 at 189 South First. It had chestnut woodwork throughout and was one of the show places in Fulton. The Fulton Chamber of Commerce now occupies the house. At the original location of the pottery at 364 South First, a new house was built by Timothy Pratt following the fire of 1892. When the Sealwright complex was constructed, Pratt's house was moved to the vicinity of Division Street. It is still there. I would like to mention again that we're looking for people that would like to come to our show and tell of their memories, especially of Oswego County. If necessary, we will use photographs, and they can bring those if they wish, and we'll work them in with the show. I don't really.
The name of the program?
The name of the program is Memories of Oswego County. I'd like to mention that we'll be taping our first series for Memories of Oswego County on Monday, November 21st. If you are interested in being on this program, please call me at 593-1306. The production of this show is brought to you by Save the Video Productions. Now, I'd like to tell you about Mount Adna Cemetery, which is right up here on East Broadway. And in its census of the people there are many famous names. And probably the most famous name on the cemetery census is that of General Albert Lindley Lee, for whom the present Lee Memorial Hospital is named. He was born in Fulton on January 16, 1834, when the area was still the town of Valney. His parents were Dr. Moses Lindley Lee and Anna Case Lee. Dr. Moses Lee was active in local politics and a staunch abolitionist. Albert Lee graduated from Valley Seminary in Fulton at the early age of 15. Valley Seminary at the time was one of the leading educational institutions in the country. From here he went to Union College in Schenectady. Following graduation in 1853, he attended Yale Law School, from which he graduated in 1855. He returned to Fulton to practice law. The abolitionist feelings of his father had left a deep impression on young Albert. His legal practice in Fulton was of short duration, as he left soon for Kansas, a hotbed of the slavery controversy. Joining the Free Slave Party, he teamed up with D.W. Wilder to publish the Elwood Free Press newspaper. He became a friend and supporter of John Brown, who was captured after an unsuccessful raid on the arsenal at Harper's Ferry. By the time he was 26 years of age, Lee was a judge on the Territorial Supreme Court. In 1861, he resigned to take an active part in the Civil War. He joined the 7th Regiment of the Kansas Volunteer Cavalry on October 29th of that year. Moving up fast in the ranks, he became a colonel. His regiment was active in the operations preceding Grant's attack on Vicksburg. He was appointed a brigadier general in April 1863. As general, he served as chief of staff to John McClernand at Champions Hill and the Battle of Big Black River. He was wounded during the siege of Vicksburg. After he recovered in 1864, he became chief of cavalry of the Department of the Gulf at New Orleans. During the time there, he courted Victorine Lind. They were married there in that city. 2 months before the war was over, General Lee resigned on February 3rd, 1865. He and the new Mrs. Lee had other plans. They left New Orleans for Paris in 1870. 2 sons were born of this union. The voyage to Paris turned into unhappiness as one of the sons died on the way. He was buried at Liverpool, England. Their stay in Europe lasted 20 years. They returned to New York City, where General Lee became a partner in an investment business. It was here that he accumulated considerable wealth. He died on December 31st, 1907. His body was brought back to his hometown of Fulton and placed in the family mausoleum at Mount Adna Cemetery. His wife donated the land and furnished the money to build the original building of the hospital that bears his name, the Albert Lindley Lee Memorial Hospital, that was dedicated on May 12, 1910. Mount Adna Cemetery presently is in a severe financial bind to the tune of $40,000. The superintendent of the cemetery, Mylan Hubbard, has not been paid in several months, and other payments to creditors have lagged behind. The problem is inflation of the cost of services. The cemetery originally was planned on a budget based on the sale of lots and the donation of families whose relatives are buried there. The sale of lots has not kept up with the costs, and the relatives of the families have moved away. The maintenance of the roads and upkeep of the grounds have increased so much cost-wise that the income no longer supports them. In the 42 acres of the cemetery grounds is the largest grove of oak trees in the state of New York. The beautiful Case Memorial Chapel has become a casualty of neglect. People from all over the U.S. come to visit this community treasure, yet the community allows it to slowly erode and decay along with its heritage. Now, an update on this, there are many organizations that have taken an interest in here, and there's many volunteers that go up there to help clean up. So things look pretty well for the cemetery, give and take a few more months. Good? Okay. I had to update that. What now? Well, you want me to get off of Fulton? I got many, many stories. I got hundreds of them here.
Whatever you'd like to do.
One on the CCC camps. Ah, that's a beauty, but this is a good one. Part 2. Yes, that's a 3 pages. I hope I can hold out that long. I'll give it a whirl. All right. Okay.
When you're ready.
Okay. Ready to go? Okay. People can tell you all about the Great Depression of the 1930s. You can watch all the movies that were made about it. And you could read on the microfilms all that the newspapers had to say about it. But the only way you could really understand it was to live through it. I did. Some parts of the country were affected more than others. The city of Fulton was one of the more fortunate areas as far as employment went, but there were still families on relief. The outlook for the youth in both the Fulton area and nationally was one of no hope. It seemed like every time you picked the morning paper, another person had jumped out of a window in some tall building to end it all. People who had saved up for old age all of a sudden saw their bank deposits wiped out overnight as bank after bank went under. National unemployment was 25%. Juvenile crime was rising to unheard of heights, and the government was close to running out of money. 250,000 apathetic youths roamed the country on the bum, looking for work because there was none at home. They did not wish to be a burden to their parents. When Franklin D. Roosevelt took office March 4, 1933, he promised action and action now. He had been elected on his New Deal promises. One of these promises was backed by the bill creating the Civilian Conservation Corps. The next month, the bill was signed into law. It was the most significant manpower project in the history of the civilized countries of the world. What it did was to take wasted land and wasted youths and turn them into something productive. The CCCs, as it became known, was set up on a military chain of command by World War I officers, but with a distinct understanding that there would be no military training. By July, 274,375 enrollees had been settled in camps throughout the U.S. By the end of the year, 1,500 camps had been set up, with 55 of them in New York State. The recruiting went like this. In Syracuse, initially, 150 were recommended by the City Welfare Department, with 161 from neighboring counties. In Fulton, the enrollment center was at All Saints Church, with Father Warden in charge. While the age limit for enrollees was 18 minimum, the good father accepted some youths under this age because, quote, I know your family needs the money. The money had to do with the boy's pay for a month's work. The enrollee received $30 a month with $25 of it to be sent back to his family. He was allowed to keep $5, which still would buy a lot of things at that time. Cigarettes in the CCC camp commissary cost 10 cents a pack. Saturdays and Sundays were free time. Beer in the neighboring towns was 10 cents a glass. The better-known CCC camps in the area were Selkirk, Fairhaven, and Green Lakes and Manlius. Area enrollees at first were shipped to Fort Ontario in Oswego for processing. They were quartered in the old National Guard barracks. There was room for 1,000 men. Most of the boys thought they would end up in the Adirondacks or nearer home. Actually, very few did. Boys like Joe Pancala and Norm Ducharme of Fulton ended up in the state of Washington. So many youths from Fulton were sent to Pomeroy, Washington, that they named the camp Camp Fulton. Green Lakes Camp, like many throughout the U.S., furnished volunteers for firefighting and other emergencies. In February of 1939, a terrible fire in Syracuse took the lives of 8 firemen. Green Lake sent a contingent of volunteers to help sort out the wreckage in the Collins block. Colonel Robert Gaw, now deceased, from Phoenix, is one of the regular Army inspectors that regularly kept things at Green Lakes up to specifications. He also had charge of the camp at Letchworth Park. Camp 29 at Selkirk was started on 1,000 acres of purchased and abandoned farmland. Like most camps, it had a number of barracks and recreation areas. It had a sawmill where lumber for the camp's use was milled. Break walls and piers for later use were constructed during its time. 24 permanent cabins were built. Picnic and parking areas were constructed. Fairhaven, likewise on the lake, had similar equipment and projects. It also had its own quarry where stone for fireplaces and construction was mined. In 1939, because of defense preparations and an increase in the military, the CCC shifted to separate its appearance. The color of the uniforms was changed to a forest green. The hats were labeled Forestry Service. The age limits was changed from 18 to 25 to 17 to 22. When you reached 22, you were discharged. It still managed to give its youth the wonderful qualities of life that included pride, health, education, self-respect, training, and the all-important tolerance and cooperation that can only be learned by sharing living conditions with others of various creeds and ethnic differences. From the time of inception in 1933, the CCCs existed for 9 years and 3 months. When Congress failed to appropriate money on June 30th, 1942, to run it longer, because of World War II, it ceased to exist and was disbanded. Its impact during this time on the U.S. economy had been immense, especially for communities near the camps. Several 100,000 reserve officers, specialist teachers, engineers, and craftsmen were put to work from the unemployed. Over 3 million underprivileged youths were fed, clothed, and trained. More than 100,000 of these were taught to read and write. 5,000 obtained high school diplomas. 270 received college degrees. The average camp spent $5,000 a month with local merchants. There were no state parks before the CCCs. All the 55 CCC camps in New York State became state parks. My father-in-law at that time, Lieutenant Leonard P.I.'s of the Regular Army Reserves, became a chaplain at the CC camp at Gilbert's Lake near Oneonta. He also had several others in the area. If it had not been for the CCCs, I would have met my wife of 54 years. Oneonta is my hometown. That ought to do it, right? Okay. You want me to undo this thing?
Yeah, just run it.
Okay, thank you for tuning in, and I hope you enjoyed our show. Our next show will be Monday, November 21st, and if you would like to appear on it, please call 593-1306. All copyrights reserved for this program. 1994. Okay.